Welcome to Meiji Masters podcast. Today, I'm incredibly grateful to have the company of Leon Lloyd. So, Leon is a former professional rugby player who represented Leicester Tigers, Gloucester, and England. In 2008, was faced with making a transition into the real world when injury ended his career. Building on his experience, Leon published his first book, From the Boot Room to the Boardroom, alongside graduating with a first-class honours degree in business leadership and management, and successfully transitioned into the world of business. Leon led the charity as CEO of Switch the Play for 4 years, and now is the managing director of Centrum Solutions. Leon, thanks very much indeed for coming down to talk to us at Meiji. We're really, really grateful. You've had an incredible career, and you're one of the few guys I know that has transitioned from playing at an elite level in sport into kind of an elite level in business. So there's a lot to talk about today, both as your career, how you started off, your life in Coventry, how you became a rugby player, and how your career ended and you moved into the world of business. But let's start the story in Coventry, because in your book, Life After Sport, there's a great little thing you say where for the first time you're holding a rugby ball, you're not quite sure, this funny shaped ball, and you say you're a bit like Forrest Gump running from one end of the field to the other. So can you just, for our listeners, just describe how your career started?
Yeah, absolutely, and great to be here. If I think back to that time, I was only 13, and I grew up, as you mentioned, in Coventry, inner city Coventry, where no one in my family had played rugby before.
Okay.
And typically, most schools, in the type of schools that I went that around then, football was the major sport. They didn't play rugby unless you went to an independent school. Okay. But for some reason, this school I went to didn't play football, and they only played rugby, which was weird. So for me, and I didn't know anything about it. It looked pretty dangerous to me. Right. I had no interest in playing. But if I think back to what I was like as a young kid, as a young boy, I was quite quick at running, had a lot of energy, got myself into a lot of trouble. I was quite boisterous and scrapping, as it is at that sort of age, is just come part and parcel. And I think my PE teacher, Mr. Parker, put my boisterous energy and my speed together and said, right, you'd be good at rugby. Right. And they forced me to play rugby. And
they forced you to play?
It was a detention. I remember I had to stay behind after school. And they made me play rugby, and I had no interest. I didn't like the look of it, and I was thinking, no, it's not for me.
Right.
But they gave me the ball,
right,
and out of pure fear of being caught by...
Always a great motivator, yeah. Right.
Pure fear of being caught by somebody else and someone potentially putting their boots or studs on my face or body, I ran quite quickly to avoid. That for me, rugby's a game of evasion. I know you look at it now and it's about collision and smashing into each other, but certainly back then it was about how do I not get caught? How do I not get touched? And I ran very quickly, avoided getting caught by anybody, to the point where I don't even know if I scored a try. I think I just carried on running. And then someone said, put the ball down. I was like, I put the ball down. And I remember Mr. Parker said, do that again.
Right.
And they kicked the ball to me and I did it again. And I realised in that session that it was okay. As long as you didn't get caught, it was actually okay. And that sort of built on and on and on, a bit like I mentioned in my book around Forrest Gump.
That's right.
Yeah, and getting them to just keep running and not really understanding the laws of the game. But a lot of my mates who played football then started to play rugby as well, so it became more of a pastime than a hindrance and a sort of a chore. But yeah.
So you clearly were a natural athlete of sorts, weren't you?
I played all sports. My dream was to, and it still is to score the winning goal for Coventry City in the FA Cup final. Right. I played all sports. I played hockey, basketball, cricket. Rugby was the only one that I didn't play until that was forced upon me. But yeah.
So when you have this kind of seminal moment and you're carrying the rugby ball and all of a sudden you realise you've got a natural aptitude for the game. So what happened there? How did you progress? Because you were playing for England under 17s fairly rapidly then after that, weren't you?
So I was 13 when I picked the ball up. And bearing in mind, if I take you back to that time, rugby wasn't professional sports. It wasn't a career choice for people. It was amateur. So I wanted to play football, and the football dream, if that wasn't going to be, I was going to be a fireman. Or I remember watching Top Gun, so I wanted to be a fighter pilot. I've done lots of different things. Yeah. But then I played for Coventry schools, and I was lucky enough to be captain of my school team, captain of Coventry, played for Warwickshire schools and Midland schools. And I got picked to play for England schools under 16s at Twickenham. And it was from that match that I got sort of spotted and invited to Leicester Tigers by a chap called Pete Lloyd, who was local to us, no relation, but just had the same surname. And he came over and met my parents and said, look, Leicester Tigers would be interested in looking at Leon to go over and play in their youth team.
Okay, so Leon, for those who are not rugby aficionados, is Leicester Tigers the equivalent of today of kind of like a Man City?
Yes, absolutely.
That's like the elite rugby team.
Absolutely, yeah. But and certainly back then they were at the top in the amateur era. They were at the top. There was them and Bath Rugby were the two best teams really in England. And for me, it was like, oh, do I really want to go? Bear in mind, it wasn't a career choice. Do I want to travel over to Leicester? Where's Leicester to start off with?
Right.
And then, did I really want to do that? And is it going to take me away from my friends again? But I'm glad I did go. I went over and I met the likes of Dean Richards and Rory Underwood and Martin Johnson, who then were superstars, but not the superstars they went on to become. But so I got invited over at 16.
Okay.
And I ended up signing for them at that age and making my debut at 17.
Talk a bit to us about what it's like being, because at 18 you're kind of turning pro, right? So what's it like living as a pro athlete? Can you describe? So what's like? What's your day like? What's the training like? What's the atmosphere like? What's it like living the life of a pro athlete?
So when the game turned pro in '96, I was living with Martin Johnson,
who is one of the biggest men I've ever seen in my entire life. He's like a wardrobe with legs.
He absolutely is, and he's the grumpiest man as well. He very rarely smiles. Right. So he was Leicester captain. Right. He was England captain.
Give us a feel, because you're a strapping man.
Yes.
How tall are you?
I'm 6', just under 6'4".
6'4", but how big is Martin? How heavy was he?
I think he might be 6'6", 6'7".
Right.
He'd be must be nearly 20 stone. I think he's a monster. He's an absolute monster. And
I mean, that running into you.
Yeah, it's about avoidance, right? It's evasion.
Okay, so you're with Martin Johnson.
Yeah, so I live with Jono, and I think the club, again, I've referred to my boisterous behaviour.
Right.
The club decided that for me to get the best out of a young kid with potential, who had the potential to go one of two ways.
Right.
Let's put him with someone who can show him what the opportunities are there, and if he decides to take them, great. If he doesn't, we'll send him back to Coventry. So I live with Jono. He put me on the straight and narrow.
How did he do that?
He's quite methodical. He's quite in his approach. He's very professional. The game, he worked at Midland Bank. Do you remember the old Midland Bank?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
But he's very focused. He was professional before the game went pro, and I don't mean he got paid. Just his attitude towards training, diet, his focus was just unbelievable. There was a core group of people. There was him. There was Neil Back, Graham Roundtree, another player called Matt Poole as well. Who they all went on to become superstars, really. Okay. So I was surrounded by those people. And
was he your first mentor?
He would have been, yeah. Him and Backy, who was also from Coventry, who used to drive me over on a Tuesday, Thursday when I was in the youth team. And when you surround yourself with those type of people, I'm a big believer of you're a product of your environment. And I just copied them. I followed them. I listened. I didn't speak. They probably, looking back at it now, they probably thought, who's this kid just loitering around? Hadn't played for the first team or anything else. I was in the youth team, but I was just there all the time. And they just allowed me to be there, which was great, and I'm grateful for. I just listened to how they spoke, how they behaved, how they trained, what they did, and I think over a period of time that became the norm. But it also meant I became very old before my time. So I was only 17, 18, but I was thinking and speaking like a 23, 24, 25-year-old. But when the game turned pro, it meant I was perfectly placed to adapt and adopt the behaviours that were required to be a professional athlete. So what does that mean? That was make sure you get the right sleep in, making sure you're getting the right food in before training, after traiing.
So give an example, like what for a rugby player, right? So what are you eating?
So it's protein, carbohydrate. I'm quite slight,
right.
Or I was certainly quite slight when I was playing.
Right.
So putting muscle mass on was important for me. So I needed to eat the right foods at the right time. So understanding, being educated around that. Right. Where some of the guys were either in thin club or fat club. I was in thin club. I had to try and put weight on. The other guys in fat club tried to lose it. Right. But again, understanding that and just being swept along in what the club was telling you to do, and they were learning as well because the game had just turned pro. Right. So they were trying to figure out, what does that mean? Does it mean we just pay the players, do the exact same thing we were doing before, but pay the players? Well, no. Now you've got to look at the science behind it, and rest is as important as the actual training. So the club were figuring it out. We as athletes were figuring it out because a lot of the guys had jobs. So did they go semi-pro and try and transition into professional, or did they just pack their jobs in and just chase the dream? Because no one knew if this was a long-term thing, or it could have been 1 year pro, then they realise it didn't work and they go back to being amateur, and then
to Civvy Street.
You can't jack in your job. So there's a lot of experimenting going on, and I think when I was at the right club at the right time, we signed an Australian coach, Bob Dwyer, who came over and gave me my chance, my debut, by selecting me ahead of the legend that is Rory Underwood, Leicester Tigers and England legend, and I was only 17. So to pick me ahead of that person, straight away puts you in the spotlight whether you like it or not, because the support.
That's a very young age, isn't it?
It
I
is,
mean,
yeah.
that's super 17 is wow.
And the supporters then would be looking, who is this kid? Like we got, I think, remember that year, the club had just opened the Underwood Suite. So there's a restaurant on the ground and the new stand. We had Tony and Rory Underwood at the club at the time, and all of a sudden this snotty nosed kid who's 17 is keeping Rory Underwood at the team. Who was he's someone who I sort of looked up to as well and tried to copy and emulate. So there's a lot of pressure straight away because you have to deliver. And so I'm very grateful that the coach put that on me. But it was a good opportunity to get so young.
So you end up playing for Leicester. You end up also playing for England. So you played for England 5 times?
I did, yeah.
So can you talk a bit about what it's like playing for England, and who did you play under? Who was the manager at the time?
I'm very fortunate to have played England school, as I mentioned before, and I've played England 19s, England under 21s, England. So I went through all the different age grades. Apart from England, was the one that you obviously want to play for your country. Sir Clive Woodward, who wasn't Sir Clive Woodward back then, he was just Clive,
right?
Before he won the World Cup. So he was my England under 21s, one of my England under 21s managers.
Okay.
And then when he got the big job, so he already knew a bit about me from the under 21 days. So he was the coach that gave me my first shot. He picked me for the World Cup squad in 1999.
Right.
And that sort of, I was a young, 2021. I can't remember how old I was in that squad, but again, surrounded by all the superstars of the game.
Right. So can you talk a bit about Sir Clive? Because I mean, he's the only guy who's won the England World Cup, right?
Yeah.
So, and he's a bit of obviously a legend. What was he like? What was his style like?
I think he's been described as a bit of a maverick. He was he tries to do things different. What he was really good at is surrounding himself with. This is one thing I've taken in my business world, is surrounding yourself with good people.
Okay.
Find what they're good at and bring them in. He would be the first to admit he didn't know everything. So what he didn't know, he filled the gap with people who did.
Right.
So no expense, respect. If we needed something, we had all types of experts in their field come in just to try and get that, what we now know as marginal gains.
Right.
But back then it was like just those little percentage points. How can we become better? Whether it's around sleep, whether it's around peripheral vision, whether it's around nutrition, whatever it might be.
So all the tiny details.
Minutia.
And was he the first guy to really do that in the world of rugby?
I think so, yeah, because I think a lot of people followed suit after then. And as a player, you don't really think about that. You're like, I just want to play.
Yeah.
Is it going to make me better? Is it going to make me quicker?
Right.
Is it going to make me stronger? And he would justify, or the experts would justify, well, by doing what they said would make you a little bit quicker, a little bit stronger, a little bit more focused. So you need everyone to buy into that. And I think Clive was quite good at getting everyone to buy in. So that 99 World Cup squad, which we lost in the quarterfinal to South Africa, a large core of that squad formed the 2003 squad that went on to win it in 03,
Right.
which I wasn't part of that, unfortunately. But the stuff that we developed in the build-up from 99, they were the foundations that team went on to be super successful and sort of make history.
Okay, so now in your book, you talk about a lot of the injuries, because sadly, your career ended early because of the injuries you had. And you were part of the 99 squad, but you weren't part of the winning squad a few years later, although a lot of your teammates were. So can you talk about, because there's a moment in the book where you're lying in hospital, having been operated on by the world's leading knee surgeon, and you wake up from your operation, and he says, I've got good news and I've got bad news for you.
Yeah.
And that's when the sledgehammer comes down.
Absolutely. And I remember the conversation like it was this morning, because I had my first knee operation on my right knee when I was 20. In training, I dislocated my meniscus in my knee, and it sort of popped out and went back in, so I had a tear. And so I always thought that I subsequently went on to have 6 operations on that knee throughout my career. So I always thought in the back of my mind, at some point, that's going to be the knee that's going to be the part of my body that lets me down. Right. So certainly during the middle and latter parts of my career, I'd get tackled and I'd be like, I'd reach for my right knee. Is it okay? Oh, it's okay. Because the rest of my body was my neck injuries, same as everybody else, different injuries. And this one game, I went down injured, got back up, checked my right knee, it's fine. I was actually a bit sore. I couldn't say it was my left knee that had gone.
Right.
But I was fine. I thinking it's my left knee. Left knee's perfect. There's nothing wrong with my left knee. So I went to see the surgeon, who on first name terms with, who I knew very well.
Right.
And I thought, great. We had a quarter-final. I was at Gloucester at the time. I thought, great. Under the knife, quick clear out, clear the debris out. May need a little trim, the meniscus, but back playing. And I went under the knife, coming back thinking, back within 3 to 4 weeks. And when I came round, that's when he came in and said, Leon, there's some good news and bad news. And I was like, right, okay. If I'd have gone under the knife and it was my right knee, I'd have gone under there thinking, when I wake up, the dream could be over. I'd have prepared myself mentally that, do you know what, I've had a good innings. So I started at 17. I was 30 at the time. So that's a good. Yes, it's early, but still, that's a lot of miles on the clock. I'm happy with what I've achieved. Because it was my left knee, I wasn't expecting it.
So it came as a proper shock.
Yeah, and to the point where he told me, look, I've gone in, it's your left knee. He said, the problem is, because your right knee's been so damaged over the years, without realising you've run differently. Yeah, and you've run down the cartilage and you've ruined the cartilage on your left knee and it can't be fixed. And I was like, what? So he left me in the room, and when he told me the news, he left me in the room to try and gather my thoughts. And it's really weird because I had this sort of outer body experience where, and I feel really selfish now looking back on it, because we just had our daughter, so Renee was just born around that time, so it's a special time in your life as a parent. And I remember having this conversation with myself after Andy Williams left the room, and I was there thinking, if the devil had come in to me now, it's weird. If he comes to now and he said to me, you could have you could finish the season, and we only had probably maybe 6, 7, 8 games left of the season, in return for 5 years taken off your life expectancy.
You would have.
I thought about it for about half a second, and I'd have snapped his hand off.
You kidding me?
I know, and that's quite selfish when you think about where I was as a parent, as a husband, my whole life was wrapped up in that identity of rugby and how much it meant to me, and the things I hadn't achieved yet. So I would have taken that 5 years off my life expectancy. Now, absolutely not. It's just a stupid thought, but I know that I'm not the only person who's had those similar thoughts.
But emotionally, was that? I mean, inside, were you crying, as it were? I mean, did you just think, oh my God, my world is over?
Yeah, inside, I may even externally my eyes may have leaked a little bit at the time, just thinking about that. And I was in this period of denial where, although he knew my knees, I knew he was one of the best surgeons around, I went and got a second opinion and a third opinion, because I thought there's got to be somebody out there who can just fix it, or just say, oh, there's a chance. But that was the denial period, and then it was a tough pill to swallow. But again, the reality was I'd played a long time, I had a lot of miles on the clock, and it was about looking after my body. But you can't tell someone when you just had that hammer blow news, it's for the best for you in the long term.
Okay, so this is where almost you have a sort of a renaissance now, because forced with having to quit playing rugby professionally, you now have to look at what are you going to do with your life?
Yeah.
Right. Earlier than you would have anticipated.
Yeah.
So how did that process begin? How did that? So what are you thinking now? You're thinking, I can't play again. Like, what do I do?
I mentioned that knee operation I had when I was 20, and I was quite a quick runner anyway, certainly in the teams that I played in. And I was always nervous that when that stopped, if I lost my speed or if I couldn't play again, what was I going to be good at? I left school at 16 to go and sign pro, so I didn't have a degree, at that point. So what I did was, after my first knee operation, I tried to get some work experience at the club, and the club were brilliant. We had an MD at the time, chief exec, at the time, David Clayton, and I asked him if I could go and shadow him for a week, and he let me go and shadow him. So I wanted to. I love business. I love understanding leverage and just people development and relationships and everything else. So I went and shadowed him for a week. I worked in the ticket office at the ground to understand how to deal with customers. I worked in the catering department.
That must have been bizarre for people coming in, seeing you.
Yeah, it was. Answering the phone to disgruntled supporters and everything, all those things. But it was character building. It was really good for me to understand. Yes, while we're
humbling.
It was, because we're the people on the pitch doing. We think the world revolves around us on the pitch playing, but there's lots of other people who save up their hard-earned money to come and watch on a Saturday. So they are disgruntled and they are disappointed if we don't perform. But for us, it's all about us on the pitch. It gave me a bit of perspective around, if we don't perform well, it has an impact on season tickets, has an impact on hospitality, has an impact on sponsors, and all those things. So I learned that from working in the different departments around the ground, even with the groundsman and in the accounts department. So I did all those things. So amongst my peers, there was this, we'd be on the back of the bus talking about what we're going to do when we finish occasionally, because people didn't like to think about those things. And they'd say, oh, be all right, I'll get a job with Lloydie because he's got his fingers in lots of pies and he knows what he's doing. And if people are saying it, you sort of believe it a lot. Right. So when it happened, I believed I'm okay. I'm perfectly placed to transition, because I had set up a number of businesses whilst I was playing. I had a great black book, great connections. But it's the things that I hadn't prepared for that absolutely blindsided me.
For example?
Being part of a team, being part of that close-knit team, and then turning up, being told where to be, what to do, like the whole structure that I was in, the bubble, the recession-proof bubble I was in, all of a sudden I'm on the outside looking in. Then 3 o'clock on a Saturday, bearing in mind, for 15 years of my life, 3 o'clock on a Saturday was game day. So all of a sudden now, 3 o'clock on a Saturday, I'm walking around Cheltenham with my wife and my daughter, and I'm like, I don't want to be here. Without saying it, I don't want to, I don't want to be here. I need to be somewhere else. Right. And the lads were carrying on playing without me, and my body was sore. So I had some trouble with neck injuries and hands and knees and everything else. So my body was sore. I was feeling sorry for myself, and I'm thinking they're carrying on without me. All this pain, all these things I've been through, it means nothing. I've literally wasted that time of my life. So I had this little bit of like feeling sorry for myself, and the team carried on without me. And some people would argue they were better without me, but I'd argue that fact. Right. But then I had this feeling of guilt, because I then remembered all the other players who had retired before me, and because I was so focused on the game at the weekend, like someone would come in who just had a career-ending injury, you know, and they'd go, "Hi lads, yeah, I'm not going to be able to get back from this. I'm leaving." We're like, "Yeah, good luck, Dave. Hope it goes well. We've got a game at the weekend, so we'll catch up with you later on." And we're so focused on the match at the weekend, and poor old Dave, now I know what poor old Dave was going through. Right. So I had this real feeling of guilt, to the point where I reached out to lots of my ex-teammates to sort of apologise for just dismissing.
Did you really?
I did, because none of my teammates at the time, although I was at Gloucester and I'd only played with them for a year, I wouldn't really expect them to reach out to me because I hadn't really formed that bond. Whereas if I was at Leicester, I was there for a long time, I'd like to have thought that, how are you getting on, what you do, but you don't, because you realise you're such a small part of a big machine. Which that was perspective straight there and then, to thinking every sacrifice I'd made, every decision I'd made was how could I make the team better and myself better, to all of a sudden being on the outside looking in. That was quite difficult.
So how did you work out your next steps? How did you figure out what you wanted to do in business? How did that come up?
So my first proper job, I took a year out. I didn't do anything for a year. I tried to figure out who I was, because my identity was all wrapped around, I was Leon the rugby player. I wasn't Leon the dad.
Do you suffer from depression during that time?
I didn't know what depression was, because in sport, it's always tough in sport. There's always moments where you're against it, and you're resilient about it. You just work hard, you train hard, you just put yourself through the mill to get through it. And I think looking back now, I understand what it meant, probably. But at the time, it was like, come on, toughen up. The language that we use, toughen up, just get on with it. Things are far worse. Just go to some things you can't train through. But I'd still go to the gym and try and train, but I couldn't shake off this fogginess that was in my head. And a good friend of mine, Lewis Moody, former teammate, England captain, he found a role that was at Oakham School, where he used to go to the school, and thought it really matched my skill set. And that was after about a year. So we moved back to Leicester, where our friends, our main core of our friends, we had children around the same age, so it was a support group. Don't forget, when you finish playing sport, you lose your job, but you also lose your mates, the medical staff. You lose everything in one go, really. Everything on that. You don't just lose your income, you lose the whole thing. Right. So then we were living in Cheltenham, so we moved back to Leicester to be around our closer friends. So it was easier for my wife to have friends who had children the same age as well. Because again, you're trying to deal with parenting as well and all the other things. So I had my first proper job, and I didn't really know what I was good at. I just knew I loved business. And then, so I developed through that. And I ended up writing a book, as you mentioned before. I was asked by the RPA, which is the Player Association group, that because I'd dipped my toe in lots of different areas, could I do something? Could I write a book around what would I tell a younger version of myself for the next generation of players to learn from the mistakes? Now, the challenge I had with that was, I suppose, vulnerability. All my peers thought that when they finished playing, they were going to come to me for a job because I'd got it sorted. Right. What I couldn't then say to them, lads, I haven't got it sorted. Right. It's far tougher than what I ever thought it was, because you got people like Neil Back and Austin Healey and Mike, all those guys thinking that I've nailed it and I've planned for it. Right. So I didn't tell anybody that I was struggling.
Right. Because Leon, on the outside world looking in, a lot of people, I imagine, like me, would think, well, if you've been an pro sportsman, depending on the sport, because every sport is different, but you would have thought rugby's up there. It's not like saying, I was an ex-Tiddlywinks champion, right? But you would have thought, one would think, actually, you've played for 10 years, played for England, so therefore you must have made millions of pounds on sponsorship. You must have all the connections. You're going to glide into, either commentating on the television, quiz show, a career in media, and it would be fairly comfortable. But that's not the case, is it?
No, the reality is, it's not. This is rugby union, and back then, so 16 years ago, the salaries are not. It's not like football. Right. The salary, certainly nowhere near everyone has to get a job
Right.
when they finish playing.
They have to get a job.
There'll be one or two people who I know globally who wouldn't have to work again financially. However, if you think about what makes those people as good as what they are, it's not about money. It's about the desire to be the best.
The mindset.
The mindset. So when you stop playing sport, you don't all of a sudden stop becoming a high achiever.
Right.
You just need to find a new thing that you want to be the best at. So it's not about finance. It's about what's your purpose. It's about what can I be the best in the world at again. That's the challenge for a lot of people. To how do you fill that void of when you finish playing?
Because in your book, there's a great chapter called "To fully appreciate the sweet, you must first taste the sour," which is a great chapter in there. So is this part of the sour?
So for me, that's my life motto. I think because what sport shows you, and not just sport, it's a reflection of life as well. Life is tough.
Right.
There are tough times in life. There are tough times in sport. Just in sport, it's on camera and you have to live it out in front of millions of people. Right. So and the reason I live by that motto, if you like, is because I played in 16 chances of winning the gold medal, being the best, and we lost in 5 of those finals.
Right.
Now, would I love to be sat here now saying to you, I've got 16 medals, 16 trophies, never lost a league, never lost a cup? I would. That's pretty impressive.
Very impressive.
However, I genuinely believe the 5 that we lost and how low and how disappointing and earth-shattering the experience was for all of us, to experience that low, that made the highs of winning taste so much sweeter. Because we understand we don't want to be in that place again.
And do you think a lot of your contemporaries would feel the same?
Absolutely. We use it. People always say, it's not just in sport. You learn best from your failures, and what can you do differently. And I think in sport we certainly look to have those feelings that are horrible and use that as fuel to motivate us to go.
So another chapter in your book, again, great book, great chapter, is dealing with setbacks. So, how do you? Fundamentally, is it all to do with that mindset?
I think
it is. So can you elaborate on that? How do you do it? Because a lot of people, when they hit this turbulence in their life, for you it was the ending of the career and what you're going to do and transition to go on to what? How do you get that mindset? How do you get those dark clouds away from your horizon?
For me personally, reframing. So reframing difficult situations to try and find a positive. And again, it goes back to that sweet and sour moment. We're always going to have difficult situations, and I'll give you an example which happens in sport, and I don't know if it happens so much. I've not found it so much outside in the commercial world. Right. So I've been very fortunate to have played in European Cup finals, which is the Champions League of rugby, if you like. But then I've also been dropped or rested for those big games as well. Right. And I don't know any other environment in the world where when you've heard that devastating news that you've not been picked for a game which you think you should be picked in, and you feel that you're the better option, is that you go up to the person, your teammate who has been picked, and you say to him with a straight and genuine face, congratulations for the match this weekend. If there's anything that I can do to help you prepare for that game, let me know. And inside, you're thinking, I should be wearing that shirt. Right. But you do that because that's your role as part of no one person's bigger than the team. So to go and say that to that person who's wearing the shirt and running out in front of 80,000 people at Twickenham or wherever it is, in front of millions of people on TV, but you're there now playing a supporting role, that's a skill. You don't realise that's a skill at the time, because normally in the real world, you get passed over for promotion or somebody else gets the thing that you want. The toys are out,
it's all like Succession, isn't it? All the backstabbing.
Everything goes on, whereas you can't have that in sport because it's so fast-paced and you're all going in the same direction. As soon as you're not going in the same direction, you stand out.
And presumably your teammates must pick you, they must know. There must be kind of like an osmosis amongst the team that someone who doesn't genuinely, I'm assuming this, correct me if I'm wrong, doesn't really believe in the team and the great, all for one for all type of thing. You must stand out, surely. The other guys must say, you know what, this guy here is a little bit...
It's self-selected, really. So in that environment, if you're not swimming in the same direction as the team, you stand out. And in that environment, you don't stay around, because it's uncomfortable, because you identify yourself as that person, and then the team. We were very much peer-led at that Leicester Tigers team. I think that's why we were so dominant in the years we were there. And there were some world-class players who came to Leicester Tigers, didn't quite fit into that environment.
Why is that? Because it was a bit too much me type of thing?
A little bit like big fish, small pond sometimes, and but there we had world-class players. I talked about 7 players in that team went on to win a World Cup. but not one of them, Martin Johnson included, was bigger than that team.
Was he actually a humble guy?
He had to be, because in that team, our training sessions were relentless and sometimes more physical than the actual matches.
Really?
So people were grounded very quickly, no matter who you were, and you could be called out on things as well, which I really enjoyed.
Amongst your peers or amongst the coaching staff?
It didn't really need to get to the coaching staff. It was always done in our peer group. So no matter who you were, you could be called out by a younger, in a respectful way. You could be called out for something. You own your mistakes. Yes, you celebrate your successes. It's hard to learn. It's hard to learn, but when you're in it, it's normal. In the pursuit of excellence, you have to be called out on things. And if you're not living the non-negotiables, if you're not living them, you need to be called out. And if you're not prepared to call somebody else out from, then you're at fault. And as a young player coming through, certainly I'm going to go back to when I was 17 in that team. The thought of calling somebody out for that didn't happen really then.
Okay.
So only when the game turned pro, it moved.
Okay, so let me ask you a question. If I was to give me the top 3 things for creating a winning team, would you say? Because after you've answered this, I'd like to talk about Centrum Solutions and the work you're doing now with pro athletes and members of the army, and helping them transition from what they're doing into kind of civilian life. But if I was to say to you the top 3 characteristics to create a winning team from your experiences, what would you say those characteristics are? Top 3.
I'd say accountability.
Number 1.
Trust. And I would say identifying the non-negotiables. And I think they're all aligned. They might sound quite similar, but unless you have the accountability piece and you own the mistakes, you're not going to develop trust, because it always people point in a different way. Whose fault's that? If someone asks the question, whose fault is that? Then you haven't got the accountability. I didn't need somebody on a video session after a match on the weekend. If I made a mistake, I didn't need my coach or my teammates to point out, "Oh, Lloyd, you've messed up there. Why have you done that?" Because I would own that mistake in the video and say, "Look, lads, I've done this. This is what I was trying to do. It didn't work, or it did work, or it failed for whatever reason." But not being afraid to own the mistakes. Yeah, so that's really important. And when you've got that, then trust follows, because people know that you're not shirking responsibility. Again, that comes from the non-negotiables that you identify from a culture perspective. What does it mean to play here? To wear this shirt, which lots of people would love to do. What do we agree collectively, not what's been pushed down to us by the boss? What do we as a group of players agree collectively that we will not stand for?
And that was all peer-led.
It was, yeah. I think we're lucky because we had so many world class, yeah, and they set the foundation for the next generation to come through, right. And they've picked up the baton and they carried it on forward, and that's how you generate that legacy.
And Leon, who was the singular most inspirational either coach or player that had the biggest influence on you? Who was the guy?
Do I have to say one, or can I say 2?
You can say 2.
I'll say Martin Johnson, because of as a leader of what he did and how he led all of us. You know, sometimes from the front, sometimes from the back. You're just different types of a different leadership style. But I suppose individually, I'd have to say Neil Back. Neil Back. Right. So he played for Barker's Butts in Coventry, where I come from. He drove me over to Leicester. He's vertically challenged. He's quite a short player for his position,
right.
But world class. One of the best in the world, if not the best, number 7 that England ever produced, because of his size and because of his relentless attitude and who he played against. And he held everybody to account. He held himself to account. He was just the ultimate professional, but not professional rugby player or sportsman, the professional individual.
Really?
So on the field, professional; off the field, professional.
Right.
And he certainly led the way for not just me, not just our team, but also England and the British Lions.
Wow. Okay. There's a quote I'm going to read out here from your book, right? Which is around on the forward, which blew me away. It was so interesting, and I'd like you to expand on why this happens, and because Centrum Solutions, I think, is part of the solution to prevent this. So the quote is: by the time they have retired for 2 years, 78% of former NFL players have gone bankrupt or under financial stress. Within 5 years of retirement, an estimated 60% of former NBA players are broke.
Yeah, scary.
And that's from Sports Illustrated, March 2009. So, what's going on, and how do you, I suppose, help these guys transit? Like, what's going on here? Why does this happen?
I think it's that the bit we talked about today around finding your purpose and your identity being just the athlete and not really putting anything in place, not planning for the inevitable. So we all know, like, the 3 guarantees in life, you know, death, taxes, and your rugby career or your sporting career is going to end.
Right.
But people plan for death by writing a will. People plan for taxes you should plan for taxes by paying your accountant and putting some money aside. But not certainly back then, or certainly from when those dates were there. And in my experience, people don't plan for when their sporting career is going to end. They just park it and they'll say, "I'll do that next year or next season," and then all of a sudden it whacks you in the face.
Right.
And it's not. Some of the issues are preventable, 100% preventable through planning, but through the relentlessness of just trying to be the best athlete, we have learned that by thinking about other things, it's going to detract you from achieving your ultimate goal.
So how do you help these guys? What is it you got? What is it you do?
So we help them with their identity to understand they are more than their job. So they are ultimate elite athletes, but they're also students or non-exec directors or parents or siblings, or just actually giving them that perspective and get them to chase and search for the passion that they have outside of sport. Help them realise that by focusing on something in addition to what they're doing, don't see that as a plan B. Because when you see a plan B, like life after sport, people go, well, I'll think about that after I finish playing.
Right.
So by saying life outside of sport, it means there's so much research now that shows better people make better athletes. So by doing those things outside, if it actually makes you a better athlete,
right,
why would you not do it? So it's an extension of your plan A, not a plan B. And by doing that and getting enough people to understand, do you know what, I want to create a legacy in sport, but also use it as a springboard for the rest of my life. I think that's what we try and help our athletes and also members of the military put the building blocks in place so that it's not a cliff edge when they leave. Yes, there's going to be it's a hill, but leveraging the skills and the experience you've had to launch into your next career is far better than falling off a cliff.
Because talking about, I mean, you work with some elite members of the British military as well, helping them transition. And one would have thought, actually, why would they need help? They've got, they've been there, done it, seen it all in the action. They've got this amazing mindset. And presumably they must have a great network of people who've also, it should be easy, but it's not easy for those guys, is it?
No.
Even though they're at the pinnacle of what they're doing, but they find it difficult.
It's like anything in an elite space. To be elite at anything, you have to be focused. There's an element of selfishness. There's an element of ego to get to where to achieve those, to achieve that greatness, if you like. But again, in those structured worlds of being told what to do and where to go and everything else, you lose sight of the wider perspective. So what we do to help those individuals who are at the top of their game, and I feel very lucky and very privileged to work with them, is help them understand what skills they've developed over a 20, 30-year career, which are hugely sought after outside of the...
In civvy street.
Yeah, because they're unaware of it, because they just think turning up on time or turning up early is normal, or they manage to bounce back from the unbelievable setbacks, shrug it off, control the controllables and carry on. That's a great skill that lots of organisations are looking out for. But there's leadership, there's teamwork, there's communication skills. So we work with some pilots, some Red Arrows pilots who travel at 500 miles per hour, 9 feet away from each other, and being able to communicate effectively is quite important in that role.
Well, one would hope so. Yeah, otherwise.
But again, that's just normal. That's just normal for them. They don't realise all those skills that they've developed day in, day out, week in, week out, year in, year out are hugely sought after. All we do, in inverted commas, is help them identify what they are, then match them with organisations who are looking to hire those superstars that, when pointed in the right direction and the right support around them, will absolutely fly and thrive again in a next career.
And would you say guys that you deal with who have been financially successful, even those guys, I'm assuming, need help as well? Because even though they've got the money, I mean, it's very well documented. A lot of football players have got bad, gambling addictions. Yeah. And, Bradley Wiggins was in the paper we were discussing earlier. Bradley Wiggins was in the paper, hugely successful. But even he's had his own issues once he's quit cycling, haven't they? So I'm assuming even the guys who have made lots of money, it's not just about the money, is it?
It's not about the money. Yeah, obviously, there's an element of you need to earn money to survive. When you're talking about the top, 1% or 0.5% who don't need to worry about money for the rest of their lives, they don't stop being a high achiever overnight. They're still driven to be the best they can be at whatever it is. And how do you chase that adrenaline of playing in front of 50,000 people week in, week out, twice a week? How would you do? You drive fast cars, you gamble, you live recklessly, drugs, all that. That's why the stats around divorces and depression and suicides are quite high, because people are trying to fill a void. And I think that comes down to understanding that at some point the dream that you're living is going to end, but there's still other dreams that you can pursue. But what can you do to plan for when that comes?
Okay, so my last question for you, Leon, today, and thanks so much for coming down. Really appreciate it. My last question for you: what's next? What's the next thing for Leon? What's your next dream now? What's the next thing you're gonna? What's your next World Cup you're gonna win?
Wow, that's a great question, and I wish I had a solid answer because it always moves.
Right.
You know, for me, my World Cup was to win a World Cup playing for England, and sadly that didn't happen wearing kit.
Right.
So then it was to go to university and do my academia, and I did that, and that didn't feel like a World Cup. And I did my MBA, that didn't feel like a World Cup. I'm coming to the end of my PhD now, so hopefully when all
So
my
next time I see you, I have to call you Doctor.
well, that's the plan. That's the plan.
Right.
So if my teammates call me
Dr.
Doctor
Lloyd.
Leo, that'd be brilliant.
Yeah.
But I reckon because where my mind is, I think that if or when I achieve that, which would be amazing, and I'll be really proud of it. I think I'll change the goalposts again and just keep striving forward. So I don't really know what it is, and I like the fact that I'm always moving forward. But again, I think that comes from my sporting days of always striving to be better than my teammates. We like that competition of trying to do that one-upmanship. So.
And being the best you can be.
Absolutely, and whatever that is, if it's a race to get a tin of beans off the shelf, I want to be the first person to get the tin of beans off the shelf, and I don't think I'm any different to any other certainly my teammates. We're all the same,
winning
driven.
mindset, isn't it?
Absolutely,
It's the
yeah.
winning
I hope I never lose it.
So do I. Leon, it's been a delight to speak to you. Thanks for coming down to talk to us. I wish you all the very best, and I know we're going to keep in touch in the future. Maybe one day we can get you down to the dojo to talk to some of our instructors.
Absolutely.
Really appreciate it. Thanks a million, Leon. Thank you. Thank
Thanks
you.
for having me.